This is the Flyerdelphia Podcast, presented by SportsTalkPhilly.com, with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heaning. Hello, Flyers fans, and welcome into another episode of the Flyerdelphia Podcast, part of SportsTalkPhilly.com. I'm your host, Kevin Durso, joined once again by Rob Riches and Dan Heaning. Back from our break. We were off last week with Labor Day, but we are back again. And in just a few short days, Flyers training camp will officially be underway. It starts with the rookies on Monday, September 11th. The rookies will play a rookie game at Wells Fargo Center on Wednesday night, September 13th. And then next Friday, September 15th, the main camp begins for rookies and veterans alike. So we're going to spend this week's show getting you ready for the start of training camp, which this Thursday, big day because of the fact that the roster came out, the schedule came out for all of the training camp activities, the on-ice times. The preseason is right around the corner, a week from Sunday. So everything is coming up very quickly. So we want to start kind of breaking down players to watch at each position, getting you ready for the start of training camp, and then at the end of the show, in our last segment, we'll make our roster predictions. And we're going to start the show at the top with the forward group. So obviously, a new season means a clean slate for veterans like Claude Giroux, Jake Voracek, and Wayne Simmonds. And these guys are all locks to make the team. But as you look down the lineup, there's going to be spots up for grabs and players to watch. So who are the other forwards to watch as training camp progresses? Dan, you want to go ahead first?
Well, I think it's an easy answer to who to watch out for in terms of the young players. Nolan Patrick and Oscar Lindblom have been their praises sung for the entire offseason. Nolan Patrick, second overall pick in the draft. Oscar Lindblom played incredibly well in Sweden last season. So the question is, will they make the team? They definitely will add more skill. Oscar Lindblom was fantastic. One of the only young player in Sweden last year, pretty much, to put up the numbers that he did. He was, in terms of points and goals, he was the youngest player to be that high in the league in terms of point production. And another point I wanted to make with those two young players is, if they don't make the team, you have a very average forward group without them. Some of the lines of just throw out there. They're not set in stone, obviously, but this is what it would look like without them in the Flyers lineup. So you have Wheel, Drew, Voracek first line potentially, Konechny, Filppula, Simmonds, Raffl, Couturier, Weiss, Lawton, Laterra, Reed, and then you have extra forwards potentially in Vecchione and Lear. That's not great. That's not a great lineup. That's not something you want to really go to town and tell everybody that's your lineup. So with the potentiality of having Nolan Patrick and Oscar Lindblom could inject more offense. It could breathe some life into an average-looking forward group for me.
Rob, what about you?
Like Dan, I have also had my sights set on Oscar Lindblom, not necessarily because of what he's done in the Swedish league. I mean, his talent level is incredible. There is no denying Oscar Lindblom's talent, but I'm also interested. And training camp's only going to provide a glimpse of it. It's going to provide, a shorter term, kind of outlook on it in training camp in the preseason. But how Lindblom can adjust to the North American ice surface. It's well known that over in Sweden, the ice is much wider. There's a lot more room that guys can generate out there. And, on the North American side, it's quite condensed. And so how Lindblom can manage that transition, he'll get his first shot at doing so in training camp, and I'd like to see how he manages that. I am also interested in seeing how Jordan Wheel manages in training camp. I mean, it's pretty much for sure by now that he's got an NHL spot on lock, so I'm interested in, because obviously considering how hard he's worked to get to the NHL level, how much he's, busted himself in camp and what he's worked on before, I'm not expecting the guy to coast by any means. He's still going to have to work hard. There's no denying that, but I'm interested in seeing how he does now that he pretty much has a spot on lock. And I am also interested in watching Scott Lawton, because there's that well-known battle between him and Mike Vecchione for that fourth-line center spot. And Lawton's a guy, he's been here since he was drafted in 2012. You could tell he's hungry. The hunger is there. That's a guy who wants an NHL roster spot. So that's a guy to keep an eye on, especially how that battle shakes out in camp.
Well, I'm going to sound like a broken record to you guys then, because pretty much I wrote down 5 names that I'm looking forward to seeing, and 4 of them were just mentioned. So I'm going to try not to sound like a broken record. I have my own reasons for picking similar players, but Nolan Patrick is obviously the highlight of camp. Everybody has been waiting to see him on the ice, and this is his time to show if he's NHL ready or not coming out of the offseason surgery. He participated at the Brandon Wheat Kings junior camp. From all accounts, he's completely cleared. He's 100%. He's ready to prove himself. And that's kind of the point I wrote about this on Wednesday as well. This is his chance, or on Thursday, I should say. I'm sorry. But this is his chance. We've been talking about this since draft day, that this guy has to factor into the lineup, it feels like. It's almost an expectation. And while Ron Hextall's going to hold firm to he's got to go earn it, I don't think anybody wasn't expecting that. But expectations, Hextall said he has no expectations for Patrick in terms of making the team or not. He's not going to do something like that. I'm sure there's something he's looking to see out of Nolan Patrick, but he's not going to put expectations on it. The problem is that on the opposite end of the spectrum, the fans are going to put expectations on it. This was the kid that was supposed to be the best player out of the draft. Things change. He's left there at number 2, and there was no reason why he was left there other than that another player surged a little bit, and he had a year where he was a little bit hampered by injury and couldn't perform completely. He missed time, so that proved to be a factor. And all I'm saying with that is that he's got to show that he's ready to Ron Hextall, but to fans, people are thinking he's a given. People are expecting him to be on the team. So it's almost in one way curb your expectations, but at the same time, I feel that way. I feel like I don't know what else he's got left to prove at juniors to not make the team. So, but the bottom line is that everybody's been waiting to see this kid. So it should be an exciting preseason just to watch him alone. Then you bring in Lindblom, and he carries quite a bit of hype himself, and being in the running for a roster spot too, because this is really the first extended look within a game where fans will see Lindblom at an NHL level. There was that really, really, really small sampling that he got with the Phantoms a couple years back. He didn't even get that chance this past season because of how well his team was doing in the Swedish league. So there really hasn't been a good look at him yet in a game. We've seen him in development camps. We've seen how he's grown. We've seen the numbers and the performances in the Swedish league. But this is as Rob said, this is a North American game. Let's see what happens now that he comes over and plays at this level. And I'm excited to see that for sure. I also have Scott Laughton down because this is a big year for Laughton. I kind of said this a couple weeks ago about how, the Flyers protected him in the expansion draft, which indicates that they still see him being a big part of their future. And for that reason, I want to see how Laughton comes into camp, what he's able to do. There's so much attention turning to the youth and more or less the potential rookies that are going to make the team. But Laughton's only 23, so he's very much a part of that youth group even still. But you tend to forget about that because of how long ago it was when his draft year was, and the fact that he's had more NHL experience than a lot of these other forwards that have just come up in the last couple of years or that are fighting for a roster spot this year. There's an expectation to see him either perform or get out, kind of, and I feel like this is a big year for Laughton, especially since the Flyers extended him. They brought him back on this new contract that he's got. At some point, you've got to see something from Scott Laughton. And then I also have Jordan Wheel down because, as Rob said, this is his first full season. It was a small sample size last year, and truth be told, he's not in a roster battle this year. He's going to make this team, no question about it. But there's a lot of responsibility that falls on him now because of the departure of Braden Shen, and the Flyers do see him as being a big contributor on the offensive side. So what I'm curious about is how Wheel comes into camp. He had a good camp last year, could have made the team out of camp, he didn't, but was obviously a player worth watching at the AHL level all the way up until he did get called up and never looked back, obviously. So it would be a great sign to see if he could replicate a camp like that and come out of camp as strong as he did last year, even though last year he didn't make the team. And then lastly, I threw down similar to Wheel, I threw down Travis Konechny on the list as well, just because, again, it's a guy who's in his second season, and like Wheel, his roster spot's not in question either, but the second year is an important part for any player. Like Lawton and Wheel, I just really want to see what he looks like to start it off, to see where his energy is, to see how he looks in game action. You want to see him do the things that helped him make the team last year, even though he's not in a roster battle. So that's the type of stuff that I'm looking for most of all, and those are the 5 guys that really, to me, I'm looking closest at as this camp gets started.
Well, the thing with the Scott Lawton, Mike Vecchione roster battle, one thing you have to keep in mind is it could very well come down to who's waiver exempt and who's not, and we've talked about this on the show before. Lawton is not waiver exempt anymore, so if he has to get sent down to Lehigh Valley, he has to clear waivers. Vecchione does not. But you also have to take into account Lawton really needs to prove his NHL viability. Like, as you were saying, Kevin, he hasn't been great. And if you look at his, I was looking at ownthepuck.com blog with hero charts, and if you look at the archetype of certain like your wingers, centers, all of that, Scott Lawton is a fourth line or replacement level player. So that's not something that should be a first round player at all. And the only thing that he had that was actually decent, was above a fourth line player, was primary assists, which is good, but if everything else is terrible, it's not good. So his shot suppression, his shot generation. If he wants to Scott Lawton has to be a type of player that's a top 9 player, not a fourth line player. And if he's going to be a fourth line player, he's going to be pretty replaceable down the line. Meanwhile, Mike Vecchione moving down, like he's a shorter guy, he's like 5'9", but if he's the type of guy that can be a fourth line player who can play right wing or center, and he still has viability because he didn't have that season that Scott Lawton had 2 years ago. That was just kind of a headache. So, Mike Vecchione kind of has a future with the Flyers organization, even if he doesn't make the team this year. But like as we said on the show before, Kevin, if Scott Lawton doesn't make the team this year, it's time to start looking for a trade partner for him.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is I kind of talked about this when we were talking about wrapping up the offseason and things like that. The thing with Lawton is that when he spent time last year at the AHL and is performing really well, and there's players that the Flyers are dressing night in and night out, that you're wondering, you could do better than this. Surely you could do better than this. And maybe, in Lawton's case, playing as a fourth line player or as a replacement level player, it makes a little bit of sense when you compare his performance to the other fourth line players the Flyers had maybe last year, over the course of the last few years even. But they're starting to turn a corner in this youth movement and bringing players in. And it really, even more than, making the team helps a little bit here. But realistically, Lawton falls in already behind Jordan Wheel, Travis Konechny, Lindblom, Patrick, all these guys. And he really does need to climb into the top 9 quickly to give himself any form of credibility as a player as part of this future, really. Because I don't see the Flyers entertaining anything with him being just a fourth line guy. They want players, basically like we've talked about this before. If Nolan Patrick makes the team this year, which seems expected, and starts off in, say, a third line role, okay, that's fine for his rookie year, but there's an expectation as the years go on that eventually he's going to jump into 2C and then maybe even 1C. His expectations is a top line player, and Lindblom has this level of, not expectation, but if his performance level warrants a promotion to being a second line winger or even a first line winger, you're going to see it happen. Lawton hasn't done anything in his time with the Flyers so far to prove that he deserves to be any higher than the fourth line, quite honestly. They don't benefit in any one extreme or another, or they don't suffer in one extreme or another by playing him for more than the 7.5 minutes that he would get as a fourth line forward. So he's got to break out of that, basically, to me.
And this is pertinent, too, to another battle that I wanted to kind of talk about, which is the Michael Raffl versus Matt Reed battle. Not really a battle so much because Michael Raffl has tremendous hero stats. He's a first line player in almost everything. Shot generation, goals, shot suppression. Excuse me. He just doesn't get enough ice time or assists. But if he's scoring goals at a first line click, if he's generating shots at a first line click and suppressing shots at a first line click, that's great. That's somebody you want to keep bored. But to me, it seems like he has this, like he's in Dave Haxtell's doghouse. Like even like he got that scratch against Toronto, he got back into the lineup, but it didn't seem like he worked his way out of Dave Haxtell's doghouse last season, and then he got hurt. So you didn't really see him earn his way out of the doghouse. And then for Matt Reed, I said 2 seasons ago, that I thought Matt Reed was chained to Dave Haxtell's doghouse, that he couldn't get out. He was playing fourth line, getting scratched, barely any minutes, not even playing on the penalty kill. And Scott Lawton has to prove that he can kind of be a Matt Reed type, because I don't see him beating out Michael Raffl, because Michael Raffl's a better offensive player overall. But Matt Reed seems ripe for the plucking. But Matt Reed isn't all that bad. Like there's a lot of talk about like how useless Matt Reed is now. Matt Reed isn't all that bad. He gets third line ice time, but he generates shots at a third line level, which is to be expected. He produces at below a fourth line level, but his shot suppression is that of a first line winger or above a first line winger. So if you're gonna, you got to pick and choose which thing you got to do. And Matt Reed has obviously picked that he's just going to be a defense first winger. So that's kind of where Scott Lawton has to make his turn. He's got to go for, the low hanging fruit on the roster, which if there's anybody on this roster that's low hanging fruit, it's actually Matt Reed.
Yeah, one thing that I want to point out.
Who wins a battle between Matt Reed and Michael Raffl? Nobody wins a battle between Matt Reed and Michael Raffl.
I mean, here's the one thing I want to point out kind of about what Dan was saying, though, too. I'll get into this maybe more when we do our roster predictions and things like that, and kind of go over potential lines and things like that. Look, we're spitballing here because training camp doesn't start for another week, and nothing's going to come together in the first week of the preseason. We're going to need to see a few games here, have the roster get cut down a little bit, things like that. But here's kind of the thing. We talk about players like Raffl and Reed and, even throw a Dale Weiss into the mix as these guys who would get extended playing time in roles where they didn't seem like fits because they didn't have the offensive production to match up with it. In some cases, like I've always thought, Raffl is a perfectly suitable offensive player in a bottom six role. He's always been. I think as a third line player, he's tremendous. He's got upside to be able to play alongside a first line grouping. But obviously, look, things are going to change this year. We've already established this. Michael Raffl is not going to get first line minutes if you feel like you're going to put a rookie up there or somebody who's performing better. It's just it's just the way it's going to work. So basically, we've talked about this. There's a whole plethora of bottom six forwards or bottom six quality forwards that seem to be clogging up the middle six on this team in the last few years. And that's going to change as they bring in other players. So if you get Nolan Patrick and Oscar Lindblom on this team, you all of a sudden have to account for them. You're accounting for Jordan Wheel being there full time. You're accounting for Konechny being in a spot again. There's a lot of moving parts to this here. And all of a sudden you're going to see players who you may have thought, taking the line from Dan here, Matt Reed, totally useless. What do you do with him? You're going to see a guy like that get fourth line time possibly because that's the best place that you can put him. And in essence, I like Matt Reed. I've always really liked Matt Reed as a penalty kill kind of guy. If you only play him for so often at even strength because fourth line guys don't see the ice that often, he's even more prepared to take those grueling penalty kill shifts, and it can totally change the outlook on the way that this team approaches games because you're obviously going to front load the top three lines here to be your offensive go-tos. But I also think that it gives the fourth line more offensive potential than it did in years past. It's been clear that this team has not had guys who really are capable of putting the puck in the back of the net on the lowest line. And every now and then you need your fourth line to steal a goal for you, to get one of those gutsy, gritty goals that are hard to get, but those are the types of players that sometimes can do it. You're going to have some decent players on that fourth line that you didn't have in the past 2 years. It really is going to make a difference.
Well, the point I really kind of wanted to get across is that, between Michael Raffl and Matt Reed, those are players that are better than Scott Lawton right now. And Scott Lawton has to prove that he's better than them. And the only way to do that is to get better. Because Michael Raffl is a player that even if you put him on a third line role, which is perfectly viable for him, I'm not saying that he has to be in a top six role, but he produces. Mm-hmm. He can score goals and he can stop, shots from getting onto the net and put shots on the opposing net. But Matt Reed is that's how you kind of have to make a name for yourself, especially if you're Scott Lawton. You had that rookie season where you were a disaster in your own end. He's got to prove that he can play in his own end. And the only way he's going to be able to etch himself into the roster is to play defense and show that he can do that. Maybe not as well as Matt Reed, but show that he can be reliable in his own end, because Matt Reed is not a bad defensive player. He's a bad offensive player. He didn't used to be, but it's just it fell off. The wheels fell off that wagon a couple of seasons ago. But that's what coaches are looking for. That's especially what Dave Haxtell is looking for. You need guys that can just be, especially in a fourth line role, with the amount of players that they have right now. There's a little gap in the penalty kill spot of somebody who can take and Flyers fans are not going to miss these two, Van de Velde and Belmar's spots. So, Matt Reed can go there, but Matt Reed didn't really kill penalties a whole lot last season.
No, you didn't.
So,
you're right.
Scott Lawton has to prove that he might have to do that to earn himself a spot on the team. And even though he's probably a better offensive player, there's a ton of offensive players that are better than him right now. And getting onto the top 9 this season is going to be rough for Scott Lawton. So he's got to get onto that fourth line and prove something.
Yeah, and I think another thing about Lawton is that, and whether it's Lawton or Vecchione or anybody else, you could throw anybody else really in that grouping. You're not going to bring a guy up who's still that young one way or the other. There's obviously a little bit of an age difference between Lawton and Vecchione, but you're not going to bring a guy like that into the picture to have somebody like Matt Reed play over him. You're not going to sit this guy. You may do it for a game or two, but you're not going to be able to do that long term. So somebody like Reed or Weiss or Raffl is going to find themselves in the press box because of the fact that you need to get somebody like that in the lineup more frequently to be able to carve out that role. Now, maybe, it's a little easier to take with Vecchione maybe being the fourth line guy. He's only got 2 games under his belt, so it makes a little bit more sense that you're not as eager to throw him out there in a key situation, playing out of his own end. You still haven't been able to see much from him on the offensive side. But again, it's just a matter of, it's going to be a difficult decision because of the fact that somebody is, obviously, you're going to have to keep guys who, knowing you're going to sit a couple of them every game. And it's just a matter of who do you want to sit and what are the consequences of playing somebody like Lawton, who may very well turn out to be a disaster in his own end again, and is it worth it over somebody who may be able to fill the role better? I think that's kind of the point with this, is that roster battle is about a lot more than just getting onto the roster. It's essentially about carving out a spot of playing time for yourself, because I don't think the Flyers have the luxury of being able to bring somebody like that and say you made the roster and then making them the healthy scratch constantly. That is very counterproductive. So now that we've looked at the forward group, we shift our attention to the blue line. So we're going to look at the defensemen coming into Flyers camp when we come back here on the Flyerdelphia Podcast.
You're listening to the Flyerdelphia Podcast with Kevin, Rob, and Dan on SportsTalkPhilly.com.
Back here on the Flyerdelphia Podcast, and obviously over the past few seasons, the Flyers have grown their defensive prospect group very well. So with camp beginning and the opportunity there for several defensemen, let's go in and talk about who is worth watching on the blue line. Rob, why don't you kick it off for us this time?
Got a couple of guys in mind. They are all young guys because, let's face it, we know guys like Provorov are going to make it. Radko Gudas, Shane Gostisbehere, and unless he gets dashed back to Allentown, Andrew McDonald, which I don't know how likely that is. But I've got on my radar, I've got Samuel Morin, Robert Haig, and Travis Sanheim. just because you know pretty much two of those guys are going to make it. It's just a matter of which two are, and for my money, I'm taking Samuel Moran and Robert Haig because I've had a chance to take a look at Travis Sanheim during the prospect camp back in July, and obviously he's improved leaps and bounds over the past couple seasons. I mean, he was basically a string bean at the time he was drafted, and getting a chance to watch him a little bit, I mean, he looked like he was ready to take that next step. But at the end of the day, I think they still might want to get him some experience in Allentown with the Phantoms. So that's something I can see going to Samuel Moran and Robert Haig. They've been called up for a game to close out last season. They were both looking good. Obviously, first games, there's some jitters there to them. But at the end of the day, I mean, that's something that they'll be able to work through. And, if they're able to get a strong camp, these guys have been around before. They're going to need to, they're going to have that chance to look stronger, to keep developing in camp. I think that you'll see those two guys actually be able to make the jump and make the opening night roster. So Samuel Moran, Robert Haig, and Travis Sanheim, keep an eye on those guys. That's who I'm watching in camp.
Dan, what about you?
My focus is a little bit more on Travis Sanheim. He, to quote Rush, he's in the limelight right now. He's the guy that I'm looking at that he should be the front runner beyond
all the world should be a stage, and we are merely players.
And it will be for Travis Sanheim in the training camp, I can assure you. This guy made the development camp the pants-off dance-off for Flyers fans. He was being compared to Ivan Provorov. He was all over the ice. This is somebody, and if you look at his stats in the AHL, he was in the top 33 percentile in terms of goals per 60, primary assists per 60, points per 60, goals for percentage relative to his teammates, goals for percentage total, shots per games played. That's in the top 33 of the AHL. All of those things, all of the really necessary stats. He was in the middle 33% and only secondary assists and power play points per game played. And, that's not that devastating. He was clear cut, probably the best defenseman for Lehigh Valley in terms of these numbers. And I have to actually credit the source because I got that information from Patterson Avenue. Keenan Sutherland wrote a pretty good article about all that Lehigh Valley information. And when I see that, and I see the type of player that Travis Sanheim is, he's exactly what the Flyers need on that blue line. They need another puck-moving defenseman. They need to emulate the likes of Nashville and Pittsburgh so they can so their defensemen can get the puck up ice to their forwards so they can start getting shots on net, shot generation, all of that. He's exactly what they need right now. And in terms of one more spot, it's obviously the other two names, at least in my eyes, that Rob just mentioned, Robert Haig or Sam Moran. And in that same vein of using that information from Patterson Avenue, Robert Haig was only in the bottom 33 percentile of the AHL in secondary assists per 60 and power play points per 60. And he didn't play on the power play. At least I don't think he played on the power play for Lehigh Valley. So neither one of those is a big deal. He was in the top 33 in goals for and points in goals per 60 and points per 60, and in the middle 33 in everything else, which is good. He had the third best goals for percentage relative to his teammates on the team. That's good. It's not like it was a weak defense for the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. And then Sam Moran I wrote this whole thing for the site on Sam Moran. And the more I look into this guy, the more I think he's the odd man out. The more I think he's the one that needs more seasoning, that he's the one that needs to go down and back to Lehigh and see see better competition. Because if you look at his stats, he was in a kind of in a second pairing role. He's not in the top 33 percentile in anything. So he was, and then he was he was kind of like a middle 33 and below in the bottom 33 type guy. And if you listen to the POD cast, Garrett Holt had him pegged as a replacement level AHL player in terms of WAR, wins above replacement. He had the second worst goals for percentage relative to his teammates on the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. He wasn't playing top level guys. He was playing third pairing minutes for Lehigh. He was seeing second tier competition. And so if I need to be comfortable seeing this guy, he needs to play like the top guys in the AHL, because it's all he's going to be able to do is play defense. He's got to be the guy that clears the porch. He's got to be the guy that goes up against in a shutdown role. So if he's not going to be, if he can't do that in the AHL, is he going to be able to do that in the NHL?
Right. And here's my thing then, because both of you guys, I'm going to kind of be the third person in on this, because Rob sat there and just did Haig and Moran as his two picks. Dan says Sanheim and Haig. So I'm kind of, without trying to spoil everything we're going to get to in the last segment with roster predictions, I've got my eyes on several defensemen in this camp, because realistically, 2 open roster spots and it's a battle between 4 players. That, I think, is legitimately known at this point. And I think Sanheim is the headliner right now. I mean, the question is this kid ready? I mean, Travis Sanheim, as a defenseman, is very much what Nolan Patrick is as a forward. Everybody's waiting to see what Nolan Patrick has. And, I mean, Oscar Lindblom too, but Nolan Patrick's the headliner of the forward group. So everybody's waiting to see what he has. And I feel the same way with Sanheim. The big question is he ready? Is he ready? And that's, there's no denying his development has progressed and he's matured so much since being drafted in 2014. And he's definitely in the running for a roster spot, but is he ready? That's the big question. And, Dan, to your point, because you were talking about how many categories Sanheim was in among, in the top 33% of all AHL players. And you mentioned that one of the stats that he wasn't was power play points?
Yeah, power play points per games played.
Okay, I can tell you a little bit about why that may be, because if I remember correctly, the Phantoms' top power play unit, and the Phantoms had a very good power play last year all the way around across the board. The Phantoms' top power play unit, as far as I can remember, had TJ Brennan heading the defenseman, like the defensive spot. So Sanheim was playing power play 2 at that point. So sometimes he didn't even get out there because the power play was so successful for the Phantoms that, so that can get in the way of getting points on the power play by just, unfortunately, he never got his shift, or he could have been the one coming onto the ice as they completed a change, and, it's a constant thing. But I do want to see what Sanheim has. I'm very curious. Again, like Rob said, definitely no denying his progression, because I was very impressed with what he could do at development camp. I thought he looked great. I want to see it in a game now. I want to see it in game action. I want to see if he moves the puck the way that I remembered him doing it at the AHL level last year, because I was very impressed with it then. I want to see it with other NHLers on the ice. I want to see him play in his own zone, quite honestly, because that I thought in drills, his defensive work and like his footwork and his positioning was a lot better. I want to see that translate over to game action, and if it does, I mean, you got to remember, he was even, Sanheim even last year was one of the team's last cuts. They really looked at these defensemen. They took a good long look at all defensemen. Even Myers, Phil Myers, who I'm going to get into in a second, was another one they looked at very long. They took a good long look at these guys, and I don't see anything different happening there this year. I think they take a good long look at all these guys to really, because now they're spots, so they really want to see who they can use to fill that out. Like I just mentioned, Phil Myers is on my list too, because the thing with Myers to me is that he lacks the professional experience, so it makes him a long shot to make the roster. So it's a battle of 4, but it's really, it really is a battle of 3. Myers, with the lack of experience at a professional level, I love his skill set. I really do. And he's got all the tools to be a quality NHL defenseman, but look at what happened to Sanheim last year by playing that full year at the AHL level. He just, Sanheim just completed his first professional season. He's already being talked about to have a shot to make the roster. I'd like to see Myers follow the same path. Get your experience at the AHL level. It's been incredibly important to other players in the organization so far. Let him go down, get his AHL playing time. He'll get a long look in the preseason. I have no doubt about that, but he's probably AHL bound, and that's quite all right. Give him another year and wait until we see what happens in another year's time, especially with AHL experience for Myers. It's going to be tremendous. Sam Moran, kind of going off of Dan's point, it's a big training camp for Moran because for a change, the door is open here, and he's a favorite to get a roster spot, and because of the fact that the Flyers did give him a taste of the NHL last season, as if to indicate that he was a favorite. But there is, and I know I'm pushing Myers to the AHL already, kind of, but there is competition from both Myers and Sanheim here. So someone is going to, as Dan said, someone's going to be the odd man out in this grouping, and it very well could be Sam Moran. This is a very big camp for him to have to come in and earn his spot. It's not just a given that because there's roster spots available, he's in just because he's been around the longest and he was the higher draft pick and all that stuff. Nothing is a given for him. So I want to see him come in and earn that spot. The same thing goes for Robert Hagg. He got a taste of the NHL last year. He's improved over the course of the last few years since his draft year. He's also among the favorites to make the team just because of the little taste of the NHL from last year. But my thought is if Sanheim completely wows the Flyers and leaves them with no other option besides putting him on the team and bringing him to the NHL, someone's going to have to go back to the Phantoms that was considered a favorite coming into this picture, whether it is Robert Hagg or Sam Moran. I'd like to see Hagg get a shot. To me, he's always been the forgotten defenseman among the group of prospects. So I really do see that battle going both ways. It could be Moran who gets that spot. It could be Hagg who gets that spot. I really do think that Sanheim's going to come in and force the Flyers' hand here, make them put him on the roster, and then pick between Moran and Hagg. And somebody who's been playing at the AHL level for quite a bit of time is going to be back there again. And it's going to be something, it's going to leave a bitter taste in that player's mouth. But I think that's possibly what's going to happen here. And then just to throw another name out there, not for making the team by any stretch, but I want to see the player. Mark Friedman is a defensive prospect that isn't among the leading group, but I'd just like to see him get some preseason action and be part of this showcasing of prospects that's going to happen over camp and during the preseason. He'll play with the Phantoms next year. He deserves that shot, but I want to see I just want to see some, this is a time when we're going to sit there and go, I just want to see this guy on the ice. I just want to see him in a game. I just want to see this. He's one of those guys to me.
Let me tell you why. I am glad that you brought Philippe Myers up because Myers is one of those guys that absolutely does intrigue me, and he's one of those guys on a regular basis you look at him and you go, how the hell did this guy remain undrafted? His skill set has progressed immensely over the past few years, but I think that leaving him in the AHL, it's not the worst thing for him. Let him get a little bit more professional experience. I think that's the best thing for him.
Yeah, and he should be a good defensive partner if Sam Moran or either one, Sam Moran or Robert Hagg, they can partner up like as maybe the top pair at Lehigh Valley, and Phil Myers is a right-handed shot will be a little bit more natural. He'll be able to play right, and Hagg or Moran will play the left side. And then they can see, and then you can just test them out, see how they can play against the top tier AHL players. That way, you're a little bit more confident when you bring them up for next season about playing them against the likes of Sidney Crosby, Alexander Ovechkin, Austin Matthews. It's just about being able to be confident in these guys that they can perform, but also respond mentally, which is a reason why I kind of like Robert Hagg. His style has, it lends itself more to the game. He's already had to adjust to the North American style. It's already had to get into his head that he's got to be more physical, and he has. He's developed leaps and bounds, but in an under the radar kind of way. He's the type of player. He's 6'2", so he's got size. He's already got the ability to be a shutdown type player, but also move the puck up ice, which makes him a great fit with Shane Gostisbehere. And then just with him battling it out with Moran is not going to be the type of guy who gets the puck out of the zone quickly. Like he can make the pass, but it's how big is the difference going to be? And how quick can Sam Moran correct a mistake that maybe Shane Gostisbehere is going to make? Maybe Shane Gostisbehere makes a bad pinch, and then he's got to get back. And is he going to get burnt? He's probably going to get burnt more often than Robert Hagg would.
I think it's a fair point that you make there, Dan, just because regardless of who out of that pair gets picked to be on the Flyers, should Sanheim make the team, I would agree that whoever that is will play alongside Gostisbehere. I completely agree with that. And to me, maybe this is partially why I have Sanheim making the team because I agree with you, Dan. They could use another player like that. You definitely want to have the dynamic offensive ability kind of going across all three pairings if possible. You've got Gostisbehere, who clearly is a puck-moving defenseman. Provorov is so good all around that he can be that puck-moving guy, but also be able to adjust in a matter of seconds, or at a moment's notice, and get back into the play, be the defensive presence. But he can also, he's proven he's got a good shot. He sets people up very well. All of that certainly factors in. And then, Sanheim would round out that trio and give you something of that nature. And it's not to say that you couldn't pair guys up to put two of those guys on the same pairing, because, truth be told, a guy like Provorov who can move the puck and play in his own zone very well, the all-around defensive type, they're going to be doing both things at some point. He'll be a mobile defenseman. He'll be able to, lock it down in the defensive zone as well, and he's going to have to be able to. And so you're going to have to put guys together sometimes who have the ability to do both. That's just the way it is. So I agree completely. Whoever out of that group, out of that pairing, Moran or Haig, make the team, should Sanheim make the team, I instantly have them going with Gostisbehere just because of the fact that it allows them to be that, and in Moran's case, it allows him to be the stay-at-home type. But then again, truth be told, I worry a little bit. I'm with you. I worry about his ability to adjust if Gostisbehere gets caught, because Gostisbehere has been known to get caught pinching or trying to make the play offensively, and it leads to an odd man rush the other way. Is Moran going to be ready to be able to defend that? Is Haig going to be able to be ready to defend that? I do remember seeing Haig get a couple of chances in that one game at the NHL level he got last year, where he had to face odd man rushes, 2-on-1s like that, and he played them well. He played them very well. So that's the thing. He knows how to handle himself in that situation. Can Moran do it? And I think that could go a long way in determining who makes the team.
Well, here's a thought about that, too. If Sam Moran isn't the type of player that can cover Shane Gostisbehere's rear end if he makes a mistake, is Shane Gostisbehere going to be as brave, making the pinch, going for the offensive plays, than if he had somebody like maybe Robert Haig who could, pull his keister out of the fire? It's maybe the defensive partner will actually have an adverse or a good effect on Gostisbehere going forward as well.
Well, the Flyers need Gostisbehere to be I'm not saying brave enough, but they need to not lose that courage to be up on the play. That was what made him so good in his rookie year. So they need him to be able to do that kind of at will, to see the play, to recognize the play, to know when to jump in, to take a chance every now and then. Obviously, you're going to have moments where you go, I don't know, I should just take the safe play. But that's where a lot of his offensive numbers came from, aside from being a big power play presence, was being willing to jump up on the play, to take a chance, to get into the rush, things like that. And you're right, putting a responsible defensive player behind him, even as a defenseman, you just have to pull back and kind of figure out who's going to be able to bail him out should something happen and go the other way. And that falls as much on the defensive prospect as it does the goalie. The goalie's going to have to, every goalie's got to make a few saves to bail out everybody else for being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. So that, to me, factors in as well. So we're actually, instead of taking a quick pause here, we're just going to keep it right here and shift gears over to the goalies, actually.
Keep it rolling.
Because as we wrap up our look at the players to watch in training camp, we're going to look at the goalies. And look, this is a position with, as always, it's notably fewer participants than others in camp. And there's really not much of a roster battle here. But regardless, let's look at who's worth watching during camp regardless. So, Dan, why don't you lead us off on this one?
Well, I'm not really going to go with one person or, 1, 2, 3 players. I'll just go with the battles that I think that will be interesting to watch. Obviously, for the starting position, you'll have Brian Elliott, Michael Neuvert. This would have been a great duo 2 years ago when you had Brian Elliott with 16.7 goals saved above average, and Michael Neuvert had 8.31, which would have been fantastic. But last season wasn't so great. Elliott had minus 5.1 goals saved above average, and Michael Neuvert was minus 13.29. So you got to see if who's going to rebound, who's going to seize the opportunity, because Michael Neuvirth was pretty much the reason why the Flyers made the playoffs 2 years ago. So can he come back and be that goaltender? Can Brian Elliott come back and be the goaltender that he was in St. Louis 2 years ago? That will be interesting to see from the Flyers' perspective in the here and now. Now, if you want to take a look at the not too distant future, you have Stolarz versus Lyon. Now, one of these guys, and we've said this on the show before, one of these guys may not make it past this season because they're on 1-year deals. They got to prove themselves. So this is where it starts. Who's going to show the upper brass? Who's going to show Ron Hextall in training camp that they're ready to make the leap potentially next season with this battle? And then you have the prospect battle with Carter Hart and Felix Sandstrom. Obviously, neither one of them are going to make the team right off the get-go, but you want to see where they are in their games, and you want to see them in an NHL game, an NHL preseason game. See how they handle it, even though they're not going up against, a full NHL lineup. You want to see how they'll handle it potentially if they get in there.
Yeah, and to your point, Dan, Hart is on the training camp roster. Sandstrom's already playing in Sweden, so he's not going to be able to be part of the preseason. But Hart will, and I agree with you. I'd like to see Hart get some NHL action. Rob, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I think that either way you look at it, I mean, it's Elliott and Neuvirth. That much is inevitable, and Alex Lyon and Anthony Stolarz on the AHL side of things. And what kind of flew under the radar from a few weeks ago was they brought in Leyland Irving, the former Calgary Flames backup, and that's an interesting one right there. I think he's more or less just a camp body. I mean, if he can find a way onto the Phantoms roster, then good for him. I mean, he's looking to try to make his return back to North America after playing last year in Finland. So that's an interesting case, but obviously I'd like to see how Brian Elliott can adjust playing in a new city yet again, third season in a row. And, that's something where, he'll have to try to – he's obviously looking to bounce back to his 2015-16 form with St. Louis. And so that's something where – he's going to basically, there's not a lot of pressure on him right now. He's just going to play out what he can. And pretty much, honestly, I don't see that. And we'll get into this more with the roster predictions, but that's not really going to be much outside of a 1A, 1B situation with him and Neuvirth.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep mine really quick here, too, so we can get to the roster predictions, because that's going to be the meat of the rest of the show at this point. I'm like you guys. I want to see Brian Elliott just because of the fact that, here's the thing. This is one of the rare cases where I'm looking to see what a veteran looks like entering camp. We've been talking so much about rookies and new players and, the youth coming in. This is a veteran. And the thing is, it's not like we don't know what to expect from Brian Elliott, but he's really the only new addition to the team besides Yuri Laterra that isn't a rookie or a prospect. So I think he gets a little bit of extra attention just for that reason alone. I highly doubt that you see too much of them in preseason games until the very end, just because of the fact that they're going to be bouncing a few of these guys around just to get through some of these early games, trying to keep both Brian Elliott and Michael Neuvirth loose going and healthy going into the regular season. One of them will have to pull ahead and be the starter as the season begins, be the opening night starter, things like that. But really, it's not much of a roster battle. It's more or less a who's the 1A, who's the 1B. And then similarly, that's kind of the same battle for Alex Lyon and Anthony Stolarz. And the thing about it is that because they will both go to the Phantoms, more than likely at least, unless something drastic happens, the competition for third in line is going to start right here with training camp. Out of the training camp, the preseason, the 2 preseason games that the Phantoms will play once all of this is over, and and someone's going to have to start the season opener, I should say, for the Phantoms. Who that person is going to be interesting because it essentially puts a marker on that player as the third in line, that if something happens to one of the goalies at the NHL level, that if Neuvirth gets hurt, if Brian Elliott gets hurt, that could be the guy that gets the call. So that's really why it's a big question at this point with those two, just because somebody's going to take the lead. For the longest time, it felt like it was Stolarz the whole way. Alex Lyon made things really interesting last year with the way he played when Stolarz got that extended call-up and didn't play much during it when he was with the Flyers. And it certainly made things interesting once he went back to the Phantoms. So those are it echoes what you guys said. It's the same kind of thing. Those are basically the same. We all kind of said the same 3 or 4 because that's pretty much where it leads, basically. So with that, we have looked at the training camp roster and some of the players to watch. So now we're going to go into who we expect to make the roster. So we're going to make our predictions when we return here on the Flyerdelphia Podcast. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Flyerdelphia Podcast with Kevin, Rob, and Dan on SportsTalkPhilly.com.
Back here on the Flyerdelphia Podcast, and now that we've gone through all of the positions, all the players to watch in camp, it's time for us to make some roster predictions for players who may be in battles for a roster spot. So what we're going to do is kind of twofold here. I wrote down immediately the players who we know for a fact are locks for the roster, just because the fact that they're the veteran players, they're the ones who are signed to the bigger contracts, they're the guys who have made it through the offseason, they're going to be around, it's a given. But at the same time, instead of reading all of those off, we kind of came up with a different way of doing this, and we filled out the rosters by basically giving ourselves, writing up the way that we would write up as if we were writing up the opening night starting lineup, basically, the way the lineup would look. So let's pass it over to Dan. Why don't you give us your lineup first?
Okay, so if I was able to quantum leap into Dave Hackstall, this is how I would make the lineup, depending on, how things play out and all that, but based on what I believe will happen. All right, so let's go through the goaltending depth chart that I'm going to project. 1 is going to be Brian Elliott, 2 Michael Neuvert, and then 3 Stolarz and 4 Lyon. That's just getting that out of the way real quick because that's pretty much what we all expect. What I would have the defensive pairings be would be Ivan Provorov, of course, the top billing, and then pair him with Radko Gudas to give him kind of like a bodyguard, like a bulldog type guy to protect him. And also, he's good at, keeping the puck, of guarding the blue line, of playing physically. Just, Radko Gudas is the best veteran on the team to play in that position. So put him up there. Don't put him with Andrew McDonald anymore. Let Ivan Provorov graduate. And then on the second pairing, I made it predictable in the last segment. Shane Gostisbehere, Robert Hagg. I like them together. I think Hagg will bring some defensive responsibility to that, even though he's a rookie. I like his ability to push the puck up. I like Shane Gostisbehere's ability to play offense. I hope that he will play better defensively, but together I think that'll be a solid pairing. I think Robert Hagg will not shy away from being more physical, from blocking shots, and being the type of defenseman that will complement Shane Gostisbehere's skills very well. And then the third pairing I have, poor Travis Sanheim. You have to play with Andrew McDonald because Brandon Manning is the 7th defenseman, because Brandon Manning is the 7th defenseman. That's where he's got to be. You hope, and then hopefully Sanheim will respond with being with Andrew McDonald in the same way that Ivan Provorov did, and it's not burning the house down. So now looking at the projected lines that I have on the first line, I'll have Jordan Wheel with Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek. I like to have that because I'll have a left-handed shot on that line with the right-handers of like Claude Giroux and Wheel. I'll put Oscar Lindblom with Sean Couturier and Travis Konechny. Couturier and Konechny had some good chemistry last season when they were playing with Jake Voracek. I'll have Konechny shift over to the right wing because he has a right-handed shot, but that'll be explained in a little bit. And Lindblom will bring some skill. He'll be able to get in front of the net, too. I like that combination. And Sean Couturier will help them, get better defensively. And he's a big body that'll help out with that line as well. Then I'll have Michael Raffl on the third line with Wayne Simmons and Nolan Patrick. I want to have Patrick with some guys that are veterans that will protect him, not let anybody take advantage of him. no one's going to take advantage of Nolan Patrick if Wayne Simmons is on the ice. You can't fight Wayne Simmons. It's not allowed because he will break your face. And then on the fourth line, I'll have Valtteri Filppula on the wing with Jori Lehtera and Dale Weiss. This is going to be a line that hopefully can put the puck in the net. Otherwise, you have some dead weight on there. Just maybe Jori Lehtera will be that dead weight. Maybe Dale Weiss will. And then the extra forwards, you have Scott Laughton and Matt Reid, and then you probably would look to trade Matt Reid because he's eaten a lot of money to just sit on the bench.
All right, Rob, what's your lineup?
All right, well, coming from the net out, like I mentioned, it's basically a 1A, 1B between Brian Elliott and Michael Neuwirth. I've got the Moose as the 1A and Neuwirth as 1B, and obviously we'll see how that goes. One of those guys is getting hurt. You know, it's going to happen. It's like death and taxes. And on the defensive side of things, top pairing, I have Ivan Provorov and Andrew McDonald. It's not exactly ideal. Like Dan said, I would like to let Provorov graduate, but we'll keep that intact for now. We still have some younger guys coming in. And second pairing, I have Shane Gostisbehere and Samuel Morin. I think that these are two guys, their style of play, I think could balance each other out. And the third pair, I have Radko Gudas and Robert Haig. Again, two guys, Gudas being the best veteran on the blue line, and Robert Haig, somebody who's developing a solid two-way game. I think those are two guys that could work together pretty well. And the man dog himself, Brandon Manning, as the seventh defenseman, get in there when he can. It was going to happen. And if I was in charge of things, I wouldn't mind putting Manning with Provorov maybe and having Andrew McDonald be the healthy scratch, but obviously I'm not calling the shots here, and you're not paying McDonald all that money to sit in the press box. And on the forwards, I have Claude Giroux centering Travis Konechny and Wayne Simmons. I have Nolan Patrick centering the second line with Jordan Weal and Jakub Voracek. I have Sean Couturier centering the third line with Oscar Lindblom and Valtteri Filppula. Obviously, that's kind of my biggest concern, lines that I put together, because I think when the Flyers brought in Valtteri Filppula last year, I think that when he kind of settled into that second line role, I think he allowed Couturier to develop more as the third line center. I think Couturier's production kind of skyrocketed because he didn't have to, he could just focus on, the tough defensive zone assignments. And fourth line, I have Jori Lehtera and Michael Raffl centered by Scott Laughton. I know that, as we mentioned earlier in the program, Laughton's not exactly anybody's ideal choice, but I think in that battle between him and Mike Vecchione, he's going to come into camp hungry. He's going to want that spot. I think he's going to do everything he can to earn it. Now, obviously, like we mentioned, he's going to have to be a better player, and I think Scott Laughton definitely wants to be that better player. He wants to win that spot. But as we all know, there's a difference between wanting to be the better player and actually being the better player. So we'll see how he does in camp. It's a big camp for him. I think he can win that fourth line center spot.
And who are your extras for forwards?
Extra forwards. Obviously, whoever loses the Laughton and Vecchione battle can just get sent back to the AHL. And I have Dale Weiss and Matt Reid. Obviously, with some time left on Weiss's contract, sitting him isn't ideal, but going to have to make do. And Matt Reid, waivers. I don't see a problem there. I think somebody can take on the last year of his contract. And, because I think with Matt Reid, we've basically seen what you're going to get with Matt Reid. You're not going to get much with Matt Reid. And, if you sit him or you find a way to, stash him away or find a trade partner, then the better.
All right. Well, my lineup is very similar to both years combined, kind of in a way. I'll do the same thing you guys did, go from the net out. So I like you guys. I have Brian Elliott kind of getting the 1A, Michael Neuwirth getting the 1B. That seems pretty logical at this point. Just because I I can see Elliott winning out the starting opportunity, but that's about it. I mean, again, it's a 1A, 1B thing. It's known that that's where it's going to be. We'll figure the rest out. They'll figure the rest out as they go. I kind of agree with Rob. At some point in time, I think an injury is going to come into play for one of them. I'd lean towards Neuver at that point just because history shows that's kind of where it's been. So that's pretty much that. There's really not much to talk about when it comes to the goalies. Defense, I have Ivan Provorov on the top pair. Like Rob, I have Andrew McDonald on the other side. Not necessarily because I feel like he belongs there, but I just don't see them changing that up. Provorov did so well last year that I think they actually think that McDonald is part of the reason that he did. Even if that means that Provorov is going to be dragging, is going to be carrying McDonald around, for the course of next year. I have Shane Gostisbehere on the second pair with Sam Moran, just like Rob does. I feel like that's a good combo. I could easily see Moran and Robert Haig swapping out spots, but for right now, I'm going to give Moran the edge, and I'm not going to be surprised if that doesn't turn out to be Robert Haig. I'm not at all. And then third pairing, I have Travis Sanheim with Radko Gudas. I think Gudas provides a good learning curve for somebody like Sanheim in the same way that he would for somebody like Provorov. As Dan said, there's a protection level out there. You don't want to see somebody take advantage of Sanheim or Provorov, really. But I feel like with Gudas on the ice, there's a way to protect a player like that. Sanheim being on a third pairing would allow him to be utilized on a power play unit if the Flyers wanted to play him, say, on the second power play with Provorov. So I could see that factoring in, things of that nature. And Brandon Manning is the seventh, like the other guys had here. For the forward group, like everybody else, obviously Claude Giroux is your top-line center. There's no question about that. My first line matches Rob's. I have Travis Konechny on the left side and Wayne Simmons on the right side there. My second line, I have Sean Couturier centering Jordan Wheel and Jake Voracek. I have Nolan Patrick centering the third line with Oscar Lindblom and Valtteri Filppula. And then on the fourth line, pretty much the exact same thing that Rob had, although I actually flipped Yuri Laterra and Scott Lawton. I have Lawton on the wing and Laterra at center. But subject to change, and then the two extras, pretty much like the other guys, it was the odd two out at that point, so it's Matt Reed and Dale Weiss, who are the two extras. And again, I'm kind of with you on that one, Rob. I feel like Reed is one to go. The other thing about it is that, and I'm not sure how they would kind of do the work around it on this for the first part of the season, but Filppula, to me, being on his final year of a contract, seems like a trade deadline type of piece, especially if they're not quite playoff team, but not bottom feeder. That I could see him being a trade chip later on, which would certainly open up a spot to allow, say, Raffl to move up to the third line. Weiss could come in on the fourth line and take that spot very easily. Or you could allow a guy like Vecchione to come up at that point if you were able to move enough of these pieces. But that's the way I see it for now. And just to kind of throw out a mention of a couple of other players who we had talked about who are, I kind of looked at it as anybody, I think I wrote down names of every player, forward and defense-wise, who are on the training camp roster that are not able to go back to juniors. So Mike Vecchione, Taylor Lear, Cole Bardreau, Nicholas Aube-Kubel, Radel Fizleyev, Tyrell Goldborn, Corbin Knight, Danik Martel, Mikhail Vorobyov, guys like that. And all of these guys are just guys. They're just players who will probably make the Phantoms roster and be cut at some point in time during the preseason, probably at the midway point. Vecchione, I could see getting a long look. I could see Bardreau and Lear getting a bit of a decent look as well, but I see them going to the Phantoms. Defensively, we talked about Myers going to the Phantoms. Mark Friedman will go to the Phantoms. T.J. Brennan, Will O'Neill, Reese Wilcox, all the last three on that list were all Phantoms last year, and they'll be back there again this year as depth players and guys who can certainly be worthy call-ups should the Flyers ever feel the need to go that way, kind of like they've done with Colin McDonald in years past. Colin McDonald has proven to be a perfectly suitable replacement level player and a good leader at the AHL level. I've liked him a lot in that role. So basically, that's the predictions at this point. Obviously, a lot's got to happen between now and then. Camp starts next Friday on September 15th. First preseason game is September 17th. And from there, we'll see how the roster takes shape. It's really just going to be a fun ride to get to that last preseason game on October 1st. The season opener is October 4th, and somewhere in that short range of time between the last preseason game and the first regular season game, we're going to learn who the final 23 are that are on the NHL roster. So, guys, before we wrap things up, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I was curious that you guys kept Travis Konechny on your on the left wing for your lineups. The reason I did that and move him over to the right wing, that is because if you include Nolan Patrick into your lineups, the Flyers have all those centers, and then you have to move somebody off to the wing. And so I had Valtteri Filppula on the left wing, and so you have to move a left wing off if you include Oskar Lindblom. So I thought Travis Konechny was more of a fit to the right wing. What do you guys think?
I could see it.
I think Konechny's one of those guys. He's flexible enough; he can go either way.
I mean, look, I also, at one point in time, as I was trying to put this together a little bit, I couldn't decide whether or not I had Jordan Weal or Travis Konechny on the top line at this point. I couldn't figure it out because I kind of would need to see who takes the lead on that before I do anything else. I get the feeling, because truth be told, I liked Jordan Weal kind of playing the way he did last year. I thought he was great in his role. I thought he could have played on the top line. I kind of like the idea of him playing with Claude Giroux, quite honestly. But I wasn't. That's why it was kind of a coin flip for me. Which one do you put alongside Giroux? I think the one thing I see more likely than anything is Giroux and Voracek not being on the same line and seeing Simmons on the top line. But I certainly see the logic behind what you did, Dan, with putting Simmons on a line. Because to me, I looked at your lineup, Dan, and I can't tell which line is the second line and which one's the third line, really. They both look like they're of equal quality, given the players that you have on each side. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Flyerdelphia Podcast. We want to thank everyone for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Google Play, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next week when we return, we'll recap the rookie game, first and foremost. That'll have happened on Wednesday, September 13th. And then look ahead to the start of the Flyers preseason, which will be coming up that Sunday, September 17th. Their first game is against the New York Islanders. And so we'll get you ready for that as well. Training camp will be starting right in that range of things. We wanted to get a look at that first. We'll obviously, like we said, we'll look back and see what happened with the rookie game, talk about some things from that, the earliest portions of camp, and then go into more as the preseason approaches. So, once again, thanks for listening. For Rob Riches and Dan Heaning, I'm Kevin Durso, and this has been the Flyerdelphia Podcast on SportsTalkPhilly.com.
This has been another edition of the Flyerdelphia Podcast with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heaning, presented by SportsTalkPhilly.com.